Boom.
I proceeded to tell him that my
should do that.
friend was from Costa Rica.
Now the overall thickness
Great
might be
job.
tricky
I was
because
on the news yesterday in Costa Rica.
the way that the octagon works is you've got
My visit
get how many quadrants it crosses over, maybe what, 6 or 9.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't get to see it, but.
To get one clean surface to actually work when it's importing in all different directions, it may not build that. I don't know if I've been able to do that yet.
I've got it so that, like, I'm able to like manually change this one length, and it got it scaling in the void, and the void is working.
Yeah, and then so if this is a reporting parameter, whatever you're scaling for the thickness, we're supposed to have to be an instance parameter.
Okay.
Because they're both instances. Because basically what it's doing is it's reporting the length.
So the thickness needs to be an instance also.
Yeah. Because what's happening is every time it's trying to take that measurement, it's specific to one panel at a time.
Yeah.
And so if the thickness is not an instance, it won't know how to react to that.
Okay.
Okay.
So lost.
Okay, if you guys just all got in here, you just really need to download the DWG file and also the JPEG file. On your own time, you can also download all this other info. And this is a quick link to a zoning glossary for New York City. I know some of you actually aren't here because you're in New York City, so the rest of you can look at it this way.
Yeah, pretend we're there.
They'll hear it on video, don't worry.
Actually, which button? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's something you would say. Don't judge.
We're saying, where is this? I'm going to answer that one when I see since you used to ask me questions.
This one didn't even
Yeah.
Where's your special? What you broke it up a little bit? Did they win?
I don't know.
So you see you're bragging about your 1 point argument, these things.
Yeah.
Hold on. 10-point tie.
Great. One
27,
game.
there's 27 seconds left.
And
We're up 73-68.
Yeah.
We're not going to need SketchUp, right?
No, this is the only time I'd ever open up SketchUp is just to show you where it can go.
So we need just the DWG?
Yeah, you just need the DWG file, and you're going to need this JPEG file.
She's like the crazy aunt you don't want to invite to your wedding.
Everyone wants to get their wedding. I'm a ball of fun.
Map 12B JPEG and Lower Manhattan DWG. And then if you got your Revit open, go ahead and just start a new project. We're going to be starting part 2 of the semester. So no more bridges, and we'll get into some buildings.
So my sister, who's a senior in high school,
14 seconds
starting
left.
to there, she goes writing, just taking it in like her last half of the year.
I'm just letting you know.
Effing
14 seconds to
apparently
demise.
she has 2 F's, 1D, 1C. She's not doing it. Obviously not there.
can she graduate with that?
I don't know.
What is going on? What is this?
Michelle.
Let's go ahead and get started. A couple things I was going to let you guys know regarding materials and renderings that I didn't mention last class is that remember I talked about when you try to apply a material, especially in the family environment, that you duplicate a material and call it something new. The one reason to do that is if you happen to use a default material, such as whatever was part of the family, let's say it was just called default, when you try to bring in a family into a project environment, the materials do not overwrite the master file, which is the Revit project file. So if you happen to have a default, let's just say you called it default, and it was in your adaptive component or in your bridge file, and you happen to color it red or do something different to it, when you bring it into the project environment, it's not going to overwrite the exact material that's called default in the project environment. And so when you render your red, it was supposed to be red, it's going to show up gray. So just remember that's why it's important to try to duplicate names and make unique names as much as possible when you're trying to bring families into the project environment. Of course, you could always in the project environment go back and change that default and go through your whole process of however you created that material. So just keep that in mind while you guys are working through all that. Today we're going to start with, I essentially went to Google Warehouse, and there's a Lower Manhattan SketchUp model that somebody provided there. It's actually from 2008, but we're going to be using this as our base model for our next part of the project. I'm going to tell you right now, when you look at this model, if you kind of zoom around in the SketchUp model, you don't have to right now, but if you happen to download it, this area where you see this little, I'm not even sure what this is, looks like a little church or some kind of little building with a sloped roof. I actually demolished that, and we're going to be taking over this site, and I drew a couple lines here, and this is going to be our site for our hotel that we're going to be designing. So all you need to know is basically, in order to bring this into Revit, which we're going to be doing here in a little while, I basically exported. You can actually bring in a SketchUp model into Revit, but DWGs always work better when no matter what it is, a 3D model or even a 2D drawing. And so all I did here was I went here and exported as a 3D model and then as a DWG file for this particular SketchUp file. The other thing to note is that if I click on some of these different materials that are shown on the SketchUp model, and I look at the RGB value of each one, so for instance the grass is a 98, 140, and 74. The water is a 0, 191, 255. Just kind of keep those numbers a little bit in your mind. When we bring in a DWG file into Revit, essentially none of the materials come through. And what will actually happen is Revit will it'll add materials into the project environment, but it's going to name them based on the RGB values. So you'll see all of a sudden in your project folder or your materials dialog box, you might have like 6 different materials that got loaded in, and they'll all be called render material, RGB, and then whatever this value is. So you'll see a whole series of those. So when I start talking about that later on in the class, that's where those numbers came from. I'm going to close out a SketchUp because that's about all you need out of this program. And if we have a blank project open, what we want to do first is actually establish bringing in this DWG file into the Revit environment so that we can actually begin to do some massing and either solar studies and then also some floor area studies. One thing that you guys will probably want to do is refresh yourselves later on with the syllabus. On the part that talks about part 2, there's a project narrative in there, and the project narrative has our program for the actual hotel that we're going to be designing. So there's areas in square footage, for the entire area, and then also just what all the different parts are going to be for the hotel. So you'll want to either download that PDF again and kind of look at it when you get a chance. So the first thing we're going to do is we can just go into a site plan. And under insert, let's just go ahead and import a CAD file. Now I'm not linking it, I'm going to be importing it. And the reason that I'm importing versus linking is that when I import a CAD file, it does bring along some of the line styles, it might bring along some of those render materials that I was just talking about. If I link it, most of the information stays, kind of in the background as part of the external reference. Linking, you would normally do that if you plan on ever, let's say, going back to that original DWG file and modeling some more things with the site, and then you want it to eventually update in your Revit file. That's why you would link, because you can always update by reloading it. If you import, it's a one-off type of thing, so it comes in and you're actually placing it into the model, and if you ever want to update it, you have to delete it and import it again and kind of go through all the steps of setting it up.
If you link it, you have to keep that CAD file with.
Yeah, so just like in AutoCAD, if you're familiar with XRefs, if you happen to move your Revit file and take it with you on a USB stick, you don't have to always have that link with you, because what it will do, Revit will say it can't find the link, and it'll say it'll use the last known reference of it in the model. But if you ever want to, happen to reload it or do something else with it, you'd have to always bring that with you. You can always, if you didn't have it, you could always reload the link as well. So let's go ahead and hit import, and we're going to browse to wherever you downloaded your Lower Manhattan DWG file. And when we import anything that's a DWG, it's always recommended. In general, I always like to do the auto origin to origin as a positioning. That's so if I ever export this and want to, let's say, bring it into Rhino or another program, and I bring it in origin to origin, no matter where I'm working, I can always bring it back together. As soon as you do anything else other than origin to origin, you're kind of manually placing it, and every time you want to bring it into another file, you're having to manually place exactly where the insertion point is, and you can start to really get confused after a while. So origin to origin is always best. Colors, I always like to preserve whatever they were. And we'll place this at level 1, and that'll be fine, and everything else is good. We can go ahead and hit open. Should only take a little bit here. You'll see the Lower Manhattan model is shown kind of up in the top right. And we're looking at it because we're in a plan view, we see it from the top. And because we started a new project, remember, in our project browser, we don't have a 3D view. So we need to click on View, and then 3D View Default 3D. So now we have our 3D model that's actually in the Revit file. And if we turn on a shaded view, you do see that it does bring over at least some of those green and the grays and everything else that were associated with that model. If I click on View and I just do a quick render, I'm just doing a draft rendering of the screen. You see what happens. It should just be a white model. Yes. So you can see when we render it, all of those colors, even though they're in that shaded view, did not come through in the render. And that might be okay because we want to have a white model as part of our context so that we can do our own model with whatever materials that we want. But you also might want at least some of the basics, like where the grass is located and where the roads are, so that you can delineate where the block is and so on. So in order to actually make those materials render eventually, one thing is you can go under Manage, and under Object Styles, and then Imported Objects, you will see that there's, under Lower Manhattan DWG, there's 2 layers, and then there's also kind of a 0 layer, a site layer, and then there's these 2 render materials that's off to the right. We're not going to worry about those right now, but look at what is calling those render materials. Render material and then some random, whatever the RGB value of blue, and the same thing with green. If we look, I canceled out of that, and under Manage again, if you click on Materials, and since we last class just went over kind of the material dialog box, if you scroll down, notice under Render Material, we have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different render materials. And here's one that's called Render Material 79-127-63. Remember I kind of threw that number out there? That happened to be the render material of grass. And you see that it turned green and it's under shading. Well, that's why when we turned it on shaded view, we could actually see the grass, we could see the road and all of that. But look at the image that's up to the top. That's still a default gray image. If I click on another one, which is the 118, that's probably one of the roads or something like that, or the 220 might have been. Anyway, when I click on all of these, that render material is not changing the appearance. It keeps the default gray value. And so what we want to do is, one thing we might want to do is under render material, the 79-127-63. Now that I know that that is the grass, we could probably test it out by, let's just change it to a bright green in the shaded view. And there it goes. When I zoom in, I got a nice bright green, so I know that that is the material that is changing. I might want to go ahead and rename this. So you click on the rename down at the bottom. Let's just go ahead and call this site grass or something like that. But there's already a site grass that's down here, so let's call this site context grass. This way we can distinguish our own from what came with Revit. And I'm going to change this green back to the, in the shaded view, whatever it was. I'll just type in 98, you got it? 79.
127, 63.
63. What's crazy is when I did this earlier, I had different numbers.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So my notes don't help me off to the left now. So anyway, but in order to change this, what we want to do now is click on Appearance. And if we scroll down under our Appearance Property Sets, there's a tab here called Site Work. And we could scroll down until we find a grass that we like. Maybe dark rye might be good. Other ones look a little fluorescent to me. Let's see what that looks like. That's kind of bright. I'm going with dark rye here. And okay. So by doing that, now when I go ahead and click on my view and render, do a quick draft rendering, I should get this kind of grass texture. And it looks a little out of scale right now, and I'm going to tell you why in a little bit, but we'll go ahead and keep it that way. We know that that works. And another one that we might want to do is the buildings. We want to make those white. We'll keep the road gray however it is right now. So again, I'll go under Manage. Let's click on Materials. I guess I should have kept my SketchUp model open. Oh, I guess we can, let's do one other thing here. Where's query? If you click on this model and then click under a query, the top right. Let's see if this works on. You should be able to click on, looks like I can click on these different parts. So I'm hovering over the buildings, and if I left click, it tells me nothing. it tells me it's a curve, it's not a block, and it's on layer 0, so that didn't really help me. I was hoping it'd give me some information about the color. Alright, so let's just guess a little bit real quick. So it's one of these render materials, maybe this darker one, the 118. If I change it to red, so it wasn't that one. Let's see if you guys can find which one it is. There you go. It is render material 152. That's the color of the buildings. So I'm going to rename that and also call this site context. Does everyone have the same numbers, by the way? RGB values? Okay. Because I have different ones on another computer. I don't know why. Site context and then buildings. I'll change this back to the 152 that it used to be, now that I found it. And then under appearance, let's just go ahead and make that a default I guess we could use a ceramic or a generic and then give it, let's do generic and then make it 255, make it all white. You guys see how I did that? Kind of a quick recap of what I did last class. Anyone need me to repeat that?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you are, did everyone at least get to the material dialog box? If I go back to materials and I'm on my render material that's called 152. Under graphics, I had temporarily changed the shading to red, but I'm going to change it back to the 152, just so it appears the same in shading. Then I clicked on rename. I called this site context building or buildings. Then under the appearance tab, under default, under the appearance property sets, I'm going to go down here and select generic. That basically gives me that sphere. Actually kind of looks like the Death Star up there. And then I can change this color. The default was 180 or just all 80s. We want to change that to all 255s, or you can just pick the white that's up at the top, or any of these white boxes. And OK. And that should update to white. If I change that. Did I do the wrong one?
Yeah, I was having a problem getting my buildings to turn red, and after changing it to white, mine didn't update either.
Part of the site turned white though when I read it.
All right. Let's see if it was this one. Maybe I was on the wrong. So I did the wrong material apparently. It doesn't quite update as nicely as you would like. So I am just going to site context buildings. I'm just going to delete that.
Would it delete whatever that was there?
Probably. We'll figure it out. Let me change my render material 118. That's what it was. Site context buildings. Default. Alright, so that worked. There's the 118, 118, 118, 1. And whatever the roads were, that still stayed the default gray color, so that's fine. Alright, that's all we need to do on that part. Let's go ahead and hit save. As we'll start calling this hotel something. You guys can't get your colors to change. It's not too drastically important at the moment. We can always go back and update those later. So the next part is, if we are looking at this, go ahead and click on an elevation view. Let's say north, for instance. Remember our levels, our floor levels, our datums. Notice that we place this on level 1. And I can drag on these datums. I'm going to drag that 3D point all the way through this. But kind of look at the scale of this. Whoever modeled this in SketchUp, not sure what scale they're using, but there's no way that these buildings are 10 feet tall. But that's exactly the scale that this model came in at. So because I want to use this, this is kind of similar to what you might do with scaling DWG plan files or even image files. We're going to get this scaled up correctly based on a set of information that we have. And that information is from the New York City zoning website. I downloaded a couple different maps, and that's what you downloaded was that DWG file, or JPEG file, that was called map 12B. And when I look at map 12B, I can see that this is pretty much the lower Manhattan part of the zoning. And you also see that kind of where our site is located, which is about right here, if I can zoom in. Well, these maps aren't 100% as accurate, or the model's not as accurate either, but we're somewhere in this location right here. So the zoning for this particular space is in a C6-9 zoning. We'll get into that next class, but just remember that. Also, when we look at this map, one thing that we can notice is that down in the lower left-hand corner, there's a scale. So by looking at this map, we can have some reference to exactly how many feet, a particular inch is. It looks like it's 600 feet to an inch. In Revit, in order for me to scale this correctly, or as correctly as we can get it for the purpose of what we're going to be using it for, let's go ahead and insert an image file. And inserting an image file is like inserting a background that we can use as a reference. And the image files that we can import are shown below. It says bitmap, JPEG, or PNG or TIFF file. Now originally I got this map file as a PDF from the website. And so in order for it to be able to come into Revit, all I did was go into File, Save As, an image file, and then picked JPEG, TIFF, or PNG off of this PDF, and then you get the same thing as an image file. So now we can go ahead and select our map 12B, and then we'll also just kind of drop it somewhere on the screen somewhere. It doesn't really matter where at the moment. So you should have an image that's placed in here, and it's definitely a lot bigger than that actual model that we just downloaded from the Google warehouse. If I zoom in on the scale on that map, let's go ahead and click on Annotate, Detail Line, and then under the line styles, also go ahead and choose lines. Instead, right now the default is thin lines. I'm going to choose lines. And the reason I'm choosing lines is this line type comes up as green on the screen instead of being a black line. Annotate, Detail Line. When you select that, you should have a drop down under line style on the far right. and then you can pick lines. Now I'm going to get as close as possible as I can to the 0, hover my cursor over this, and I'm going to start drawing to the right, and I'm going to type in 600 feet. So you can see that even this image, when it came in, obviously isn't drawn, you know, it wasn't a full-scale drawing of the lower Manhattan. And so this green line right now is representing 600 feet. If I zoom back in on the scale, I can draw another line. I'll kind of draw it below this other green line that I just did. And I will draw a line and get it as close as possible to this other 600 feet. You may have to zoom in. You don't have to be exact, but just close enough. So my line is like 41 foot 6 inches. Everyone got those two lines? So basically what it's saying is this image right now, 41 foot 6 inches of it is equal to this 600 feet. If I click on this image, actually zoom in, and now that you have those two lines, I'm going to take this shorter line and I'm going to move and snapping to the end point and move it up to overlap exactly on top of the larger line that we drew. So you should have two overlapping lines that you can tab over and kind of cycle through, that they're on top of each other. Next, I'm going to select the image, and so now in order to scale this image to be kind of true scale, actual scale, once we select the image, our modify tools pop up, and under modify, there's a tool here called scale, right there. Let's go ahead and click on scale, and we'll keep it graphical. We could do a numeric scale, which would mean I'd have to actually pull out a calculator and type in 600 feet divided by 41.5 feet, and I'd get some kind of scale factor that I could type in numerically. Or I could just keep it graphical. And then my first point that it's telling me to click on, it says click to enter origin. I'm going to click this endpoint. Then it wants me to enter a drag point. That will be that short end of the line that's at 41 foot 6 inches. So I'm going to keep moving my cursor until the endpoint shows. I'll click there. And then it wants me to pick another line as the end reference. And that will be the end of that line. So now what I did is I basically now have something that I could actually draw a line on top of this image, and I could actually kind of physically know that I am drawing something to scale that's in a real scale. When you're done, you can just delete those two lines. One will be really, really small now, because it was at 41 foot 6 inches. Go ahead and just delete those. So now, if you look at what Manhattan looks like in the image, and then I try to zoom in on my model, look how small the actual SketchUp model was in comparison. So we definitely know there was some kind of scale issue going on when that was actually modeled, or maybe when we brought it in, we did something to scale it, but you know, that's a possibility as well from moving from one software application to another. Everyone get your image scaled up? So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to zoom in on this model. And it might be kind of hard to see. Maybe we can turn on a shaded view. And when you zoom in kind of on that lower right-hand corner of Manhattan, you'll see all the buildings are kind of gray or whatever color we ended up eventually coloring them. But you'll see these kind of black lines that outline a space. This is where I demolished that little, whatever that building was, and I'm taking over the rest of this site. And so I drew some lines in the SketchUp model that you guys imported. You know, I exported to DWG and then imported it into here, but before I did that, I drew in SketchUp just a couple lines that will reference our boundary of our site. Next thing I'm going to do is zoom out. And this part right here where it says financial square, I believe that to be this location on our site. And for the sake of what we're doing, it looks correct to me. There's 1, 2, 3 buildings or 3 zoning spots, and then there's all these little buildings off to the right. If I kind of zoom out, I've got kind of the same situation. Maybe the blobs aren't all exactly the same, but it does look like the length of this street here should be something that we can measure. So now, in order to scale our DWG file, I'm going to click on the detail lines again under Annotate, and I'm going to trace as best as I can kind of the start and end point. You know, again, we're not going to be exact, but I've got a dimension of 312 feet. So you could also just type in 312 feet. So I know that that length, according to all the information we have at the moment, is supposed to be 312 feet. And if I go and find the same location on my little model, and if I were to use the measurement tool, so up here in the quick access toolbar, which is up here at the top, it's this toolbar that never changes. There's the ruler command, so you can measure, and I can just click on 2 points. And I may have to tab to get that other endpoint because of just the angle that we're at. So we can go ahead and tab on that, and you can see that our true length there is like 7 foot 3 1/8 inches. So obviously we're way off on this scale. So what I want to do is I'm going to draw another line, but this time I'm going to pick lines. Let's see if I can do this on the, yes, okay. So sometimes when you have a CAD background, actually all the times when you have a CAD background, and you are on Annotate or in any kind of mode where you have these draw commands, you have this one command here called pick lines. And Revit will always recognize DWG lines in the background. And so you can actually pick individual lines that are associated with the CAD file. That comes in handy if, let's say, you had a floor plan that somebody did in a DWG file and you brought that in. You could actually literally trace your walls on that CAD file by just picking this pick lines command. But for what we're going to do, we'll use that pick line command. I'm going to pick this length, that part of the site. Then I'm going to click on modify. So this modify, or the cursor key up to the top left. It's kind of confusing because they call modify all over the other place. You just call this cursor or something. Pointer. So click on modify, and then I'm going to click on the line. When I do that, I get these temporary dimensions that show up. I've got a 49.823 degrees, and then I have a 7 foot 3 1/8 inch. Remember, on the other image, we drew a line that was 312 feet. So I'm just going to click in that temporary dimension, and I'm going to actually type in, wait, stop. Take this line and copy it. We need this original line. Sorry about that. Now it doesn't matter which line you do this in, but take one of those lines and click on it, and then change the temporary dimension to 312 feet. And it's going to kind of scale it about the center line.
Is there a way to make that line without typing? My keyboard doesn't work.
Your keyboard doesn't work?
Do you want a different?
Can someone loan a keyboard out?
Here, I'll see.
Yeah, I
From
kind
now.
Yeah, unfortunately in Revit and AutoCAD, you kind of need to type in things if you want to start to be precise. I mean, actually, to tell you the truth, you can draw a line.
There's one right here too. Maybe they make it locked.
They're a lot.
They're all locked. Can you just unplug the USB that's hooking it though? And then just unplug the USB.
You can also, you can actually draw that line by, if you draw the line and you start drawing it, you'll notice that you do get dimensions that start showing up. So you could just kind of drag this out until you get to 312. So that is a method. So you have to keep going. All right, so anyway, we're going to keep going here. Hopefully you can catch up a little bit. So take this line that's 312 feet, select it, and let's go ahead and move the endpoint. I'm going to temporarily hide this image file in the background so you guys can see what I'm doing. Take this line that's 312 feet, click on move. I'm going to select the endpoint down here in the lower right, and I want to match it up to the endpoint of our site. Okay? So again, kind of the same theory that we just did with the image. We're overlapping our two lines. And then we can do the exact same thing. We can select this AutoCAD file, and you'll notice that there is a pin, this little push pin icon that shows up. That prevents, it prevents us from changing the element position. So what we need to do is click that so that we unpin it. You can also unpin it by the icons up here, and you can also repin it by the same icon. You want to unpin this, and then we're going to do our same steps. We're going to hit Scale, Graphical, and again we'll select the endpoint and this other shorter endpoint. And then let's go ahead and scale and select our endpoint of our 312 feet. When we're done, we can delete those annotation lines. So you can kind of start to see that the annotation lines, even though they're for like drafting and doing things later on when we get into detailing, I use it a lot just for kind of construction lines and helping us kind of maneuver around in Revit and just use them as a kind of basic temporary lines that we can eventually delete. Now when we look at a north elevation, you should see that that looks a lot more realistic, that our 10-foot floor line looks about correct. That's probably about a story, and all these other buildings are probably scaled correctly as well. Go ahead and look at our 3D view. And now this time when we hit the render button, view, render, I'll just do a quick draft render. No, my grass didn't change. I was thinking my grass would have scaled correctly. So we'll have to worry about that later. I might actually just go into my grass material eventually and just turn it default green color, just so that when we actually render, we're rendering all of our materials associated with our building.
Would it have scale with it?
Under, let's see, our,
Like if we would have applied it after the scale, would it?
maybe. Let me look at my site context grass, appearance. Come on. Oh, it's going. So, well, it does have a scale, sample size, so I probably can play with this scale eventually to scale it down. But you know, the detail that we're going to be at when you're trying to render a skyscraper or whatever project, you're probably not going to really notice the little grains of grass. So it'll probably be better, we'll eventually just make that a solid color. We'll do that later on. Probably just hit remove image here. And change my color. What was that again? 79. What'd you have before? I'll just pick a green right here. I still have a little bump in there. So all I'm doing here is in my material, I'm just actually click on this down arrow and somewhere down here at the bottom, just uncheck that. So now I just have kind of a green. I just basically removed my image. We'll worry about that later on. We got plenty of time to render the site. Okay, so I'm going to go back into my site plan. And remember I temporarily hid that image. And I'm going to unhide it. And then if I kind of maneuver this around, it actually looks like I got this pretty close. If I turn on my wireframe view, I can see through the model. And it's kind of confusing, but part of this zoning map where it says C4-6 is actually some of the piers that's actually out in the water. So anyway, you can see we're relatively scaled close. I'm not going to worry about us being exact at the moment because this will give us a file that we can now work with that has some realism to it. Obviously, if we were working in an office, we'd probably hope to obtain a really nice survey of our plot of land from a civil engineer that would be to scale from AutoCAD, and that we would be working off of that. So I'm going to delete that image because we really don't need that anymore. And the next item I'm going to do is I'm going to take this 3D DWG file, and remember we're in our site plan, and this blue dot is our origin point. I'm going to make the origin of our site this lower, kind of the south quadrant. And I'm going to move that and tab over till I snap to that point. Now, one thing that was right about this model, the scale was not correct, but the orientation of the model was. This was oriented correctly to north, and this is east, west, and south. So we know that when we actually do our sun shading diagram, turn on our sun path, we should have our north, east, south, and west oriented correctly as well. All right, everyone got all this? You might want to hit save.
Yeah, it keeps moving my project.
Looks like on mine, they're both right on top of each other.
Move just the circle.
Hit Control Z and undo that if you moved your blue dots around. The next thing would be kind of zoom out a little bit, make sure you're selected just the 3D or the 3D. Then you should just have to move that. Just make sure your pin is your DWG unpinned.
Yeah, I got rid of it.
Okay. And then when you move, you're actually moving. I snap to the 3D object first, and then moved it to the dot. So that should keep the dot exactly where it was. And you might have to tab over to select the point.
object? Yeah. No.
That's what I did, but right now,
Select the point.
those things are supposed to be around.
Oh no,
that.
Are they?
Yeah, here's a, those 4 things.
and when you click on that dot, you should have everything still set to 0, 0, 0. When you click on your dot, what happens?
0, 0, 0.
Okay.
Somewhere along, like these 4 points got moved. Whatever those.
What are those
Yeah,
things?
okay, so if you guys, you see these little points that are around the dot? If you move those, don't worry. Somehow they might have gotten dragged. Those are your elevation. If I double click on one of those triangles, it takes you into the north elevation or the east elevation or south, and we can move those around later on. You don't want to delete them, because if you delete them, then you delete your elevation views. All right, everyone there? Let's get into some massing. We've already are well familiar with the conceptual design environment and all the stuff that you can do with it as far as making a bridge, and you can probably even insert your bridge in here later on when you feel like it. But essentially, now that we're actually kind of modeling buildings and we're in the schematic design phase, and we've been handed a program, and that's the program I've given you, starts to display what our overall square footage is of what we're going to be designing towards. We may want to start doing some massing studies to identify the shape of our building and how that's going to actually work. And then also at the same time, because we're doing this in a BIM environment, we can go ahead and start to track the floor areas to make sure that whatever we're modeling isn't going to be too small or too big, but we're actually trying to get something that's close to the actual square footage of the hotel or whatever the program is. Now, I will tell you that the program that I gave you is all in net square footage. So you guys all know that there's a net square footage and a gross square footage when you get into the real world. The net square footage, I might have gone over this in other classes, but I'm going to repeat it, is if you could measure inside of a building from finished material to finished material, and you get the area of a room that way. That is net square footage. It doesn't include the thickness of a wall. You're actually just going around and saying, well, I want this room to be 100 square feet, I want this other one to be 200 square feet, but we all know that we also have to build walls, and so eventually in your areas that you are handed from a client, you're going to have to calculate what the gross square footage would have to be when you're in the schematic design phase. Because if we start designing something to our net square footage of 191,270 square feet, by the time we start getting into more detail and adding walls and stairs and our mechanical rooms and all these other things that go into a building, corridors, we're going to end up with a smaller building than what we should have originally had. So what we normally do in the office is when you get one of these things, you apply what's called a net to gross square footage ratio. And there's different ratios out there and different thoughts out there. But essentially, if you could be as efficient as possible with your entire floor plan layout, and you're going to spend your whole time trying to be efficient with getting everything exactly where it needs to be and your wall thickness is correct, your ratio would actually be 65%. You might be more along the line at 75% if you want to be a little more generous and give yourself some extra room to play. So working in reverse, the actual ratio would be somewhere between, you can kind of figure in a 1.3 or a 1.5 as your ratio. So what that means is, I'm going to use the 1.5 just so we can make sure we're very generous. And I'm not going to really harp on whether or not you get to exactly 191,000 square feet in our class. That's for some other class. But this is just an exercise that you want to walk through. Essentially, if I were to take 191 and my square foot 270, and I multiply that by 1.5, that's actually the square footage that I want to be trying to design towards in my schematic design phase, the 286,905 square feet. Now remember, gross square footage, it's counting the thickness of the walls, it's counting things like stairs. So you're going to have a lot of different stairwells, elevators, mechanical shafts, all these other random things that, you know, the owner who gave you a program isn't going to tell you, oh, I only want my stairs to be, you know, 500 square feet. They're not going to know that kind of information, and plus all of that is dictated by code. So anyway, you can pick a number between 1.3 and 1.5 to work with, but for right now, that was like 286,000 square feet, so that's fine. I'm going to go into my 3D mode, and I'm going to start playing around with some massing exercises right here within the Revit environment. If I click under Massing and Site, you'll see there's a conceptual mass tool palette. This is very similar to being in the family environment and being in that conceptual mass environment that we've been working in pretty much most of the semester. But when we click on this, again, it's going to give us this little warning that says, hey, by the way, I got to turn on the mass mode, because Revit always likes to turn that off for some reason. And then it's going to ask you to name your mass. This is similar to naming kind of like your file, your family file, that you'd be working on if it was external to this project environment. I'm just going to call this hotel, maybe I'll call it V1 for version 1, and hit OK. As soon as I do that, everything kind of grayed out, and you'll notice at the very top I have a finished mass and a cancel mass icons. You also notice at the top, look at what happened to your tool ribbon. It pretty much completely changed from the project environment and turned into something you're a little more familiar with when you're in the family environment. So essentially we're actually in the family environment, but we kind of have the project environment overlaid or underlaid on top of this at the moment. So this is a way to actually model right here with the conceptual mass right inside of this model. Now we can start to do a lot of the same things that we used to do. You can go ahead and click on a rectangle, and I'll say draw on work plane. I'm going to pick level 1. And right now I'm just going to draw some form right now, kind of in the middle here. Again, make sure it's closed. I was going to draw a rectangle, but I remembered we're kind of skewed at the moment. But again, you can click on that and then say create form. It creates your solid box. And then you get those little drag handles, so I can drag this face up. And right now, I'm not really too concerned about, you know, what the actual size of this thing is. I'm just kind of playing around at the moment. So I kind of drag this rectangle up. And once we do that, we can click on individual edges. So I could tab over and click on this top edge, and I could move just that edge. So you can see how I can start to manipulate this one edge a little bit. I can also tab over. If I select this whole thing, I can click on X-ray up at the top right. X-ray will turn on all the kind of points that establish what makes up this mass that we're working with. So I can actually pick a corner point, and I could further start to manipulate this. This is what's called or referred to in Revit as intuitive massing. Put intuitive as in quotes because it's not like SketchUp, but it's a lot more intuitive than trying to plan out all of your parametric points like we have been doing. We're just kind of playing around with this piece of mass. If you decide that you want to not really worry about the rest of the site at the moment, I'm going to finish this mass and then click on the site and temporarily hide it. This way I can kind of look at the mask one more time. But once we do that, once I finish the mask and I'm basically exiting out of the family mode, and I'm now back in the project environment, if I want to get back into that mode, I have to click on the mask and then click on this box up here that says Edit in Place. So once I click on Edit in Place, I go back to my family mode. It's kind of like switching back into the conceptual design environment. Everyone kind of get that navigation back and forth? Do I need to repeat that? Because that is crucial. If you don't happen to have all the information that you're used to seeing, if I click on this green, what happened? Looks like my stuff went off the screen. I think that was possible. All right. So somehow, anyway, while you're modeling, at any moment, if you hit Finish Mask, okay, the little checkbox, notice that it went back into the project environment, and I'm now actually in the mode where I could select my imported geometry, and I could click on the sunglasses and hit Hide Element. If I want to go back in, because I wasn't done modeling this mask, if I go ahead and click on this, click on Edit in Place, that takes me back into that mode. And let me show you a couple more tricks with modeling in, kind of block form. Is that, let's say, we've extruded this mass up, but we want to go ahead and work with some more of its shape. If you have selected, if your mask kind of looks like this, if you go ahead and tab over until you select all of the mask, you should have a button up here called X-ray. Click on the X-ray mode, and as soon as you do that, it gives you some additional commands over to the right that talk about adding edges, adding profiles, and dissolving. So if I click on Add Profile, I can hover over my mask and see how I can kind of extrapolate or extract a section. So I can go ahead and add a profile. This is kind of like what we did on the bridge. Remember, we added a profile to the conceptual mass of the bridge to make it change its width. As soon as we do that, we get an additional set of points and edges that we can also further manipulate. So obviously, the more of these little section cuts that you have, the more you can begin to move it around. And Revit assumes that you wanted everything to loft together as one mass, and so it's kind of making this curved shape, when I started maneuvering those points around. If you decide that that's not what you wanted, let me go ahead and add another profile down at the bottom here, somewhere in the bottom. I can at any time select this mask, and there's another command here called Dissolve. If I dissolve this, it keeps all of my profiles and some reference points, but it dissolved the mask that we created. What we could do is then come in and select each of our profiles and hit Create Form, and continue this one by one, and we get something that's more straight, angled, lofting each of these forms back and forth. So then we actually have these, a number of different masses kind of put on top of one another. We can also draw voids. So we could, I'm going to go ahead and click on a rectangle. Remember, one of our create forms was a solid form versus a void form. I'm going to draw a rectangle. And actually, I remember we're skewed again, so I'm going to just use the line command. And we're going to draw on a work plane. And I'm going to draw on level 1. I'm just going to draw some shape here that intersects through my form. And then I'm going to create a form by doing a void form, which extrudes this box up. And when I exit out, I now have cut a void through my mask. So you can start thinking about starting off with kind of this big piece of clay and we can start to do what's called stereoatomic modeling, where you're starting to carve out pieces of your model, or you can start to maneuver and expand your model a little bit, by moving its points around in all of its shapes. I'm just going to leave it like this for now. It doesn't matter what shape you have. And when I'm done, I'm going to click on Finish Mass. And I'm not worried about that warning. And I'm going to reset my form here. I could come over here to View, and let's click on Render. Let me do a quick draft rendering. And I should see this little gray kind of box that's down in there now. That was my form that I just created. We can click on this mass, and when we're in Edit Place, you can actually tab over and assign materials to the mass. So all of these individual masses, we could assign actual material that would render something else. So we could render it as glass or some kind of chrome or whatever you want. Not going to get into that too much right now. The last thing I want to do before we have to go, I'm going to hide this. It doesn't matter right now. Let's go into an elevation view. So we're in the north elevation. I'm going to temporarily hide my imported geometry, and it looks like my view maybe a south elevation is better for now. Okay, so we have this mass. Just find a view that you can kind of see your building and elevation a little bit. And we're going to zoom in on these datum lines. What we want to do is create all of our floor lines that we eventually might work with. The default from level 1 to level 2 is 10 feet. I think we all know or should know that you're never going to really have a floor-to-floor height of 10 feet. Revit does that as a default, but you probably want your floor-to-floor height to be more like at least 14 feet and maybe even to 15 feet. I'm also going to make sure that my datum lines go all the way through my building. If they don't, it doesn't matter, but just visually it helps for right now. And then I'm going to want to create more datum lines all the way representing however many floors I could get out of this mass. So one way to make a datum line, and I'm just going to do this real quick, is we'd have to go under Home, Datum, and click on Level, and then we draw each one of these. And as you draw a datum line, you get a checkbox over here that says Make Plan View. So every time we actually draw one of these datum lines, it's going to add a new floor to my floor plan views. And then I'd have to change this to be 30 feet, and so on and so forth. But if you have like 100 floors, or how many floors we're going to end up doing, that's going to be kind of a ridiculous way of working. So I'm actually going to delete this level 3. And when I did that, I'm actually deleting a floor plan, because that datum line represents where your floor plan is located. So remember, a lot of the things that we start to see in our Revit environment, you don't want to necessarily start deleting tags that you happen to see around your drawings, because you might start deleting views. But in this case, I do want to delete that. And this time I'm going to select level 2, and then I'm going to click on, under Modify at the top here, the Array command. You can watch the little movie that it gives to you if you want. But I'm going to go ahead and click on Array, and it wants me to first click a Move Start Point. I'm going to select, hover over the level 2 datum. I'm going to copy it up, and then type in 15 feet. Now when I do that, it also has a number up here, it just says number 2 in the options bar. And when I zoom out, I also have a box here that says 2, and it is just sitting there waiting for you to input another number. If I were to deselect that, I can get that box to show back up by picking on that level that I just created, and you get this temporary dimension again, and it says 2. Well, if I click that, and let's type in 10, that is actually copying those datum lines at 15-foot intervals 10 times all the way up. And I start to see that that still wasn't enough, so I can click on that 10, or click on one of these again and click in there and maybe type in 30. And each time I do that, it's just adding more and more of these. So maybe I need 60. And I can probably subtract a few, but I don't need to really worry about all of that too much. I can come back here and maybe do 55. At least for my building, I can at least get enough floor lines all the way up to 55. But notice when I zoom in, only level 1 and level 2 are highlighted blue in the target, the little target symbol, and the rest of these are highlighted black. Now it also started to, remember I created a level 3 and then I deleted it. Revit assumes that you still wanted a level 3 eventually, and so it just consecutively starts numbering after that. So now I have a skip between level 2 and level 4. What I should have done is copied one more up, changed the name of that to level 3, and then gone ahead and done my array, and then I would be all in order. But I'm not going to worry about that at the moment. But also notice what you can do is you can click on these blue lines, or the blue targets. If I double click on it, it takes me into the project browser and takes me to level 2. If I click on this little X button here at the top right of this view to close out of this view, and I do the same for level 1, you can see it takes me to level 1. So remember, anything in blue that's a tag in Revit is associated with anything in the project browser. But notice when I did all the copying in the arrays, all of my other levels did not show up in my project browser, and they're black. Revit sometimes assumes that you don't want to make a floor plan cut at every little datum that you copy, because sometimes you want like a top of steel height, or a parapet height, or a roof height, or some other obscure height that you eventually want to reference to, but you don't need a floor plan cut of it. In this case, though, we do want all of these to be floor plans. So what we can do is we go to View, and under Plan Views, you notice my this screen resolution must have changed a little bit, but I've got a different icon set up maybe from what you have on your screen. That happens with Revit a lot. Depending on what your screen resolution is, your icons start changing around. So I might have to bump this up to whatever it used to be. So anyway, that's why I've got a different, I'm noticing I got a different screen than everybody. But anyway, under View and Plan Views, you can click Floor Plan. And when you click that, a dialog box comes up and says, hey, you want to create a new plan? Well, we have located that there are a bunch of datums that are called level 4 through 57. So we can select all of those. So just the level 4 and then hold in Shift and pick the last one. And go ahead and hit OK. This might take a minute, but your project browser should populate. It's blinking around because it's actually opening all of these views in the background as well. And you can see my project browser now just grew 1 through 57. So remember at the very beginning when I said we need to separate our project browser, I'm talking about the beginning of time of this class, project browser and the properties. This is why, because eventually you start to really get a lot of different views in your project browser that you're going to have to scroll back and forth trying to find. And having that little screen on the left, that really gets annoying. Okay, two last things here so that we can close out tonight. Under 3D view, go ahead and click your mask that you created. Now that we click that mask, because it's solid geometry, you should have a little icon up here called Model Floors. Or Mask Floors, sorry. Click on that, and you'll get this dialog box that says, well, which of these levels that have been created that are floor plans do you want to be a mask floor? I think I can select all of these and hit the checkbox. And I'm going to select all of those and hit OK. It'll take a minute. And my floors aren't showing up. What's that? Mask floors, I checked them all, I hit OK.
That's what I did, it didn't work. So I just checked it. Takes all like 10 seconds.
Till tomorrow.
Yeah, the racket could only, yeah, mine didn't work.
Probably.
So I just checked it.
I like to risk. 6 for you. You're not risky, it's not fun.
I'm risky.
Yeah.
I got
For some
Wisconsin
reason-
going to the Final Four.
Hold on a second.
See? Maybe I don't. Maybe I haven't gone to the Elite Eight.
What is it?
Because
Maybe I
it's all
haven't gone
different
to the Elite
passes.
Eight.
I think I have.
That's what I'm wondering, but
Third good squad.
They're good when they want to be good.
did everyone get their mask floors to show up except for me?
Mine didn't work, I checked them.
Yours worked?
It did not work, I
Did not
had to
work.
check them all.
So
All of it.
I just said even though. I haven't even gone to the Final Four.
I think that might have had something to do with my warning message I had earlier. It said something that it's not going to be able to compute something, and I ignored it. That was probably the computation that it can't compute.
Is it because you have those different?
I think because I stacked my different masses.
Is there a way to like fuse the masses together into one?
Yeah, you can actually join the masses. So this time I still had all those floors checked, and I switched my mass around. I kind of corrected it, and you can see that I have all of my mask floors. One thing I want to do is I'm going to click on this mask, hit edit place, and I'm going to add a material to this overall mask. Come on, guy, edit in place. We're going to go over just a little bit here. I know you guys want to watch March Madness.
They just start till 9. We're okay.
All right. So I'm going to go to material. I'm going to assign a material to this mask. Oh, the computer is slow. And I'll pick I'll just do a default, and I'm going to duplicate it, just call it default 2 for now. And under my graphics, I'm going to turn up the transparency to like something like 50. Finish.
What material?
I just did a default, and now you can see that as I did that, my shell of my mask is transparent, and I can see all of these individual floor slabs that are associated with that tower. Now what we're going to do is click on View, and we're going to create a schedule. So everyone to this point, you got your mask floors working. Click on Schedule. Click on Schedule and Quantities. And we're going to scroll down. Anything in Revit we can actually schedule. That's what's great about Revit. We can schedule doors and however many curtain wall panels that we might have had in our model. But we can scroll down to Mask and click on Mask Floor. This will make a mask floor schedule that we can hit OK. this will bring up a schedule properties that are showing you some parameters that you can schedule that are associated and built into Revit. One thing I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and click on level, and I'm going to add this to the right side of my schedule. This is like in Excel, you're kind of creating a heading, and you're adding this as a heading into your schedule. The next thing I'm going to do is click on floor area and add that over to the schedule as well, and hit OK. You now should see level 1 through however many levels you had scheduled, showing a floor area for each of the floors. But I also want to know what this total area is, and I'm going to go under to the left here, and we'll go over this again at the beginning of next class, but you see these edit buttons? Just go ahead and pick one of them. And I want to get a grand under sorting and grouping. I'm going to click on grand totals. And then under formatting, under floor area, I'm going to check the box called calculate totals. I'm going kind of fast here, but you guys we'll review this again. And we can see now that this is the area shown for my tower, which looks a lot bigger than my program area. But that's the total area for my tower. Now what's important about that is if I go ahead and set up this schedule and I set up my flat mass floor areas, if I were to click on this mass, edit it in place, and I'm going to make some adjustments to it now. I'm just going to move kind of this around a little bit, and you should see that this schedule is going to adapt and change and to reflect the new changes that I've just created. So I've got X-ray view on. All your all's computers going slow now? It shouldn't really slow down that much. But I'm going to go ahead and move this in, and I'll go ahead and finish this mass, and then we'll end here. So right now what it's going to do is as I finish this mass, it's going to readjust all of those mass floors to fit exactly in the shape of my model. And when I look at this schedule and scroll down, you can see my total has changed. So this is why in Revit, if you can start doing some conceptual massing, you can do conceptual massing in other programs, but we now have a direct link to a schedule that we can actually start to define to see if our building's too big or too small for the program that we're trying to model to. Your homework assignment from now until Tuesday is you guys got to finish up your bridges, render them really nice. You're putting them on your two 24 by 36 sheets of paper. You're going to print them out, and we've reserved the space outside of the library from Monday through Thursday of next week. I'd really like you guys to pin up all your work, just those 2 sheets, and it might help if you actually took your analog model and pinned it up somewhere around your sheet as well. Even though they might not look exactly the same, you'll kind of see an inspiration versus kind of a final product. And I would recommend really nice renderings. I know the price list is up there now, but doing something on a semi-gloss photo paper, even though that's pretty expensive, that's really cheap here. Oh my God, if you got that done at like Richa Graphics or FedEx Kinko's, it would cost you like $450 for that print. I'm not joking. We just got some prints done that cost $800.
What?
Yeah. Well, I should have printed it here. because everywhere else they charge by the square foot. It'll be like something like $6 a square foot, and this is by linear foot. So I mean, we're doing a 3-foot drawing. That's going to cost you what, like $12 or $15? That's awesome. So anyway, the better photo quality paper that you can get, especially if you've got these really nice high-res renderings, they're going to really show up nice. You can pick however you want to print it, but that's my recommendation. Get those nice prints while you can.
So next time you need a print, you come to me, we'll work out a deal.
There you go.
want like don't want like images of our models that we took or the 11 by 17
If you're doing it online, you know,
Yeah, I would just do the renderings for now, should be fine. I think it'll just get too busy if we start trying to throw all the other stuff on there, but I think having the analog model pinned up, if you still have it,
Do you care the size or the number of renderings you put on there?
nope, do what